Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. I am, right, let me get a little closer. Welcome, everyone. I am Sharon Green Middleton, Vice President of the City Council, representative for the 6th Council District, and Chairperson of the Economic and Community Development Committee. This afternoon, we will hear the following bills. Bill number 22-128R, 22-0135R, and 22-0284. And I see everyone has on their masks. And just a note, when you are recognized to speak, you can elect to take off your mask as well. In attendance, we have members of the committee: John Bullock of the 9th District.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mark Conway of the 4th District.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councilwoman Odette Ramos of the 14th District.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And Councilman Robert Stokes of the 12th District.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Might have to share your mic.
And we also have with us sponsor of one of the bills, Councilwoman Felicia Porter of the 10th District.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And also representatives from the Office of the President. I just got a message that I think a meeting has just ended with housing. So we'll have Nikki Thompson, Director of Legislative Affairs, joining us, and she is online. Representatives from the Office of the Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And you want to recognize yourself?
Adam Abdur, Mayor's Office of Government Relations.
Thank you. And also,
Sophia Gabriel Hewitt from the Mayor's Office of Government Relations. Thank you.
thank you. Let's begin. Bill number 22-0284, Sarah Ann Street Historic District, for the purpose of designating the area located within certain boundaries as the Sarah Ann Street Historic District. This bill was introduced on September 19th, 2022. This bill was sponsored by Councilmember Bullock. And Councilmember Bullock, would you like to comment about this bill?
Sure, and thank you, Madam Chair. As we've discussed before, the Sarah Ann Historic District, I think, is monumental not only for our city but for Southwest Baltimore. Here you have a set of homes that date back to the immediate period following the Civil War. It recognizes not only the Black history of our city, but also home ownership in the midst of some of the struggles that we've seen. I do want to also thank members of the community who are here, who have really been fighting to preserve this kind of legacy. Also, we know some of our academic friends, some of our historic preservation people who are here. Again, it's really an awesome opportunity to really recognize some unique architecture in Baltimore City and the contributions of those therein. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Bullock. The committee will now hear from agency representatives, and we'll start with the city solicitor, the law department.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hillary Ruley, on behalf of the Law Department, we stand by our bill report and approve it for form and legal sufficiency.
Thank you, Hillary. Next, the Commission for Historic and Architectural Preservation, CHAP.
Hi, Stacey Montgomery with CHAP. We stand by our bill as well, and just want to recognize that the Commission for Historical and Architectural Preservation found that this district designation met 2 of its criteria for designation for recognizing, as the councilman said, historic African American home ownership in Baltimore City and historic alley housing in Baltimore City.
Thank you. And your name again?
Stacey Montgomery.
Thank you. The Planning Commission.
The Planning Commission has approved the bill.
Thank you. Just so we can get clear on, so the findings can be publicly recorded, could we go back to CHAP and just kind of explain and go over the findings of the fact a little bit?
Sure. So the commission reviews its designations based on 4 potential criteria, and there's 2 that we've determined this district meets. The first is that the district is associated with the events that have made a significant contribution to the broad patterns of Baltimore's history. And the third criteria, which is that it embodies the distinctive characteristics of a type, period, or method of construction, or that represent the work of a master, or that possess high artistic values, or that represent a significant and distinguishable entities whose components may lack individual distinction. So that goes to the history of African American homeownership in Baltimore City. That's the first criteria. And the number 3 is the alley housing, which is a distinctive typology to Baltimore City.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee about the findings? Okay, thank you. And there are written reports in the file. And thank you, Director Chris Ryder, for the favorable from Planning Commission. The BMZA.
Good afternoon. BMZA stands by its report and defers to Planning Commission for this. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a favorable report. Department of Transportation. Department of Transportation. We do have a favorable report for them as well. Department of Housing and Community Development.
Good afternoon. We are extremely excited to have this bill before the City Council today. We feel that this is a long time coming for the community of Poppleton and for the Sarah Ann Street houses. This is a step in actively taking action to redress racist housing policies that have been at play in our city for decades. And the Department of Housing and Community Development proudly and strongly stands by our bill report in favor.
Thank you. Commissioner Alice Kennedy, well said. Any comments or questions? Moving on to BDC, Baltimore Development Corporation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dan Taylor with BDC. BDC stands by our report.
Thank you. Favorable report. And then finally, the Parking Authority.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Christmas Age Parking Authority, Baltimore City. We stand by our report, which is not opposed.
Thank you. Do committee members have any comments or questions at this point? Hearing none. We expect that those attending will keep order so that everyone has an opportunity to be heard. During public meetings, the Baltimore City Code prohibits a person acting in a disorderly manner to the disturbance of the public peace. If any attendee is disruptive, they will be given a warning. If the conduct continues, that person will be asked to leave or be ejected from the meeting. The committee will now take public testimony. Each person testifying will have 3 minutes to speak. And I will now call on those who have signed in to testify. And we'll start with Johns Hopkins, Baltimore Heritage. Please identify yourself, and you have your 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Johns Hopkins with Baltimore Heritage, and I just want to relate a quick story that happened to me 18 years ago. As I was a brand new director at Baltimore Heritage, I got a phone call from a name you may recognize, Tom Ward, a city council member who came before you. And he said, Johns, you got to come out to Poppleton. This is a fantastic historic neighborhood. It has got rich Irish Baltimore history. It's got rich Black Baltimore history. It's got rich Baltimore history, and it's under threat. There's a proposal that will substantially alter, demolish, and change it. That was 18 years ago. We have been on a long road from there. I'm pleased I let my friends and colleagues speak for themselves, but I just wanted to share that story. Councilman Ward is not here with us today. He passed away several years ago, but for the neighborhood and the part of West Baltimore that he fought and worked so hard to preserve, to recognize, to celebrate. It is finally making a milestone step today with this historic designation. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony. Next person, Sonia Eady, Poppleton now.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for having this hearing. I don't have a prepared speech. I normally do come in prepared. But I just want to say that for me, having this opportunity to be here with City Hall, taking on a challenge that we had been fighting for in our neighborhood to preserve it, to protect it from demolition, the same way that they do in other neighborhoods. And so just briefly, I just have written out something that I would like to say. So I'm here to represent my neighborhood of Poppleton in downtown West Baltimore. Growing up in Poppleton and being an admirer of architecture, I saw the need to fight to preserve the housing in my neighborhood, not knowing if they were historic or not, but because they were buildings that made up the architectural identity of our neighborhood, and that they deserve protection from demolition the same as Federal Hill, Reservoir Hill, Mount Vernon, Union Square, and Lafayette Square neighborhoods. So again, to have CHAP to come out and see the value of protecting houses that were lived in and owned, built for Black people back in the mid 1800s. You know, this is something that should be protected. Our history should be protected as much as white history to Baltimore City. We were here in the beginning. We have invested in this city, and we should be able to see our investments, you know, something that when you read about it, you know, that we're in. So, thank you.
You're quite welcome. The next person, Nicole King, Organized Poppleton.
Good afternoon. My name is Nicole King, and I am a resident of Hollins Market in Baltimore and a professor of American Studies at UMBC. And I've had the pleasure to work for the past 2.5 years with Poppleton residents like Sonia Eady, with my students at UMBC, with preservationists on the place called Poppleton Project to document and preserve the history of Poppleton. So the research here clearly shows that this historic block of alley and row houses dating to the 1870s speaks to the overlooked history of Black homeownership and providing affordable housing options for all residents in West Baltimore. So the establishment of the Sarah Ann Street Local Historic District is one step in the long process to repair the harm done to the residents of Poppleton through urban renewal and to center equity and preservation in Baltimore City. As Ms. Eady says, we have not preserved our Black history as we have our white history in this city. So the preservation of these historic homes for home ownership, working with Shelley Halstead of Black Women Build, can provide a more equitable model for community-led development and preservation in West Baltimore. It is not enough to stop harmful urban renewal practices and the abuse of eminent domain law used to displace Black residents. We must repair the damage done and work collaboratively and collectively to build better neighborhoods that serve and respect our legacy renters and homeowners in any process for redevelopment in Baltimore City. I thank Ms. Eady, I thank you all today, and everyone here for listening. Have a nice day.
Thank you for your testimony. And this is also a time, too, where we need to include our education system so we can students can visit these areas and you can give a history and develop a stronger relationship as we move forward with the changes that are taking place in the city. On that note, I do want to, are there any comments or questions before I move on to other public testimony? Hearing none, I do want to recognize Aaron DeGraffenreid is online, also representing the Office of the Council President. And For online attendees, if you are online and would like to testify, please raise your hand. And for this bill, and I see one hand raised. Scott Cash now.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, you're on.
Thanks. I'll be very brief. Thanks for having this. I want to thank Councilman Bullock for introducing this bill. My name is Scott Cashnow, and I live in the Franklin Square neighborhood. I'm about 3 blocks to the west of where this district would be. I also chair the Historic Preservation Committee for the Southwest Partnership. It has been something that we've been working on for a long time, and I'm thrilled to have it here. And as Commissioner Kennedy said, I'm very proud to support this. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. And I think that was the only one. So now we're going to move to telephone callers. We will now unmute you to determine if you would like to testify. And we have no callers on this bill. Do members have any comments or questions? The committee has heard testimony and recommendations. CHAP would address legal standards and findings. There's no amendments. Is there a motion to move the bill?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, so the bill is moved by Conway, second by, I'm sorry. Moved by Bullock, second by Ramos. Chair Middleton, yes. Bullock?
Yes.
Yes. Conway?
Yes.
Yes. Your voices sound just alike over there in the masks.
We're brothers.
Dorsey, absent.
He's here.
Oh, sorry. Dorsey?
Yes.
Yes. Glover? Absent. Ramos?
Yes.
Is a yes. Stokes?
Yes.
Is a yes. And this bill will now move to second reader at the next council meeting.
Congratulations.
Thank you. The next bill, number 22-0135R, informational hearing, code enforcement, non-residential property. For the purpose of inviting representatives from the Department of Housing and Community Development, Code Enforcement Division, and the Department of Planning, Division of Community Planning and Revitalization to provide data detailing code violations at non-residential properties, including unoccupied, vacant, and abandoned structures, a review of licensing and registration requirements for unoccupied, vacant, and abandoned non-residential properties, data demonstrating whether unoccupied, vacant, and abandoned non-residential properties are complying with code enforcement registration requirements, and providing guidance about how to address long-term vacancies at non-residential properties. This bill was introduced on September 19th, 2022. This bill was sponsored by Councilmember Porter. And now we'll turn over to Councilmember Porter. Would you like to comment on the bill?
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. So I thank you all for joining us here today to have this very complex discussion related to how we can hold derelict property owners accountable for their involvement within our communities. We cannot allow derelict property owners to leave their properties open to illegal activity, to discourage on the community. And so this is an opportunity for us to have an active discussion with our agencies to see, one, what can be done from a council perspective and how agency guidance can really kind of double down on allowing properties to deteriorate within our communities, and what we can do to work with businesses within our community to ensure that not only we are ensuring safe places within our communities, but that we are truly revitalizing our communities as we have seen throughout the city. I want to make sure that we have an equitable approach to making sure that derelict property owners are held accountable, but also that we are not targeting owners for just not being able to secure to secure leases for their properties. I want to make sure that this is a collaborative conversation and discussion so that our communities in Canton look like our communities in Brooklyn and look like our communities on West Baltimore Street as well. Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I saw all these people storming in here from housing. I'm like, what is going on here? It's rare that we kind of get a completely big team from housing. And so committee, we have to take advantage of this. Right. Just a light note. Okay, the committee will now hear from our agency representatives, and we'll start with the City Solicitor's Office.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hillary Ruley, on behalf of the City Solicitor's Office, we stand by our report and have no issue with the bill.
Thank you. Planning Commission.
Sorry, I'm sharing a mic. Someone stole. The Planning Department stands by its bill report.
Thank you. And Housing and Community Development. There's no opposition, but I'm sure you have some comments. Alice Kennedy, Commissioner.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the council and committee this afternoon. I am here with me today. I have Stephanie Murdoch, our legislative liaison, Deputy Commissioner Jason Hessler over permits and litigation, as well as Deputy Commissioner Eric Booker over code enforcement and emergency management. Deputy Commissioner Hart is also with us as well, overseeing our homeownership and housing preservation. One of the things that we did put in our bill report, and I want to emphasize here as well, is that vacant properties with vacant building notices are something that we are addressing across the city, whether or not they are residential or non-residential use. Our number of tools in the toolbox remain the same for utilizing for both residential or non-residential properties. And we do take into serious consideration the impact that vacant and blighted structures have, not just on our residents of Baltimore and the impact they have on our homeowners and our renters, but also in our commercial corridors and how those commercial corridors play into creating and supporting vibrant communities, whether or not you are in Canton or Brooklyn, and what those provide in terms of opportunities. We're committed to the cleanliness, to the maintenance, enforcement of the appropriate licensing, registration requirements. We know that we have room for improvement, which in our bill report you'll see that some of the numbers are lower on some of the specific metrics that were asked for, specifically around our licensing and registration, well, specifically around the registration of commercial properties. We are working on improving that in terms of finding additional resources and tools to ensure that we are getting the proper registration pieces on the vacant properties. We also included vacant lots because those play into this as well, and what is zoned non-residential in terms of vacant lots. So we do know that we have, as an agency, room for improvement. And I am here to state that we are actively looking for opportunities and continue to improve our operations and work with the council members, and community members to better our operations to support the community. A key piece of this work is not just looking at what we're doing in terms of the enforcement piece around code enforcement and the number of violations or citations we're issuing, the work we do with our code enforcement officers, our special investigations unit, our special ops unit, but also, the work that we're doing with our sister agencies and partners and community partners. It's very specific when we're talking about a vacant building with a vacant building notice and what tools we are going to utilize to address that vacant building. We were just on a call this morning looking at a property on York Road, commercial property, non-residential property, and that one we're looking at how to work within our legal realm on what is going to be a outcome that will support the other development that's happening in the community, and how best to put that property back into productive use in a as fast and efficient manner as possible. So for that property, it does look like we'll be proceeding with in rem proceedings on that one. just a property that we evaluated again on a different block. That property actually won't qualify for INREM, so we're looking at the additional tools in our toolbox, whether or not that be condemnation proceedings that we would take, which we do on commercial properties as well, looking for acquisition, but also receivership that comes into play. We have had some very good success with our non-residential properties with receivership as well, where the city does not take ownership, but we work through with receivership.
Commissioner, could you hold that thought just for 1 second? I just want to mention, you know, at the beginning of the hearing, I did mention about order and respect, and it's not just in person. This also includes comments in chat. We are working here very respectfully and in a order, and this person named Nicole on chat, I do give an opportunity for people to express themselves professionally when you get your 3 minutes, but could you please refrain from these 20 or so whatever comments you are saying in chat? Very disrespectful, and I'm giving you this first warning. Otherwise, I'm going to have to take you off of joining this meeting. Thank you.
So we are evaluating all the tools in the toolbox that we have, specifically on the vacant building notice, where properties have gone to the elevated to the point where there is a vacant building notice. In addition to that, I think that DHCD has a role, and we also stated this in our bill report, but we have a role in partnership with our sister agencies, whether or not that be planning, BDC, our Main Streets organizations, Downtown Partnership, Community Development Corporation, city council members, community organizations as well, to think about the properties that are non-residential zone properties that may be unoccupied non-residential properties. And that is going to take a different level of coordination for us to work with, because that is working not just with the owner of that building and the landlord, but it really is finding ways to support small businesses and businesses that want to create space and have new space and have funding available to support for tenant fit out, for operations, and all of the different pieces that come into play, or to support and subsidize to offset maybe rent for a certain period of time while that business is getting up and running. So I think we want to be clear and understanding at the department level that we have looked at this not just from the standpoint of code enforcement and how best to enforce the laws that we have and to hold owners accountable for maintenance of their vacant properties and holding them accountable and using the tools that we have to put that vacant property back into productive use. But while we are looking at that in terms of putting a property back into productive use, that is where we think about not just what the future of that property will be at the offset once it's rehabilitated and ready for occupancy, who is going to end up taking and occupying that space? And how can we support businesses that want to occupy non-residentially zoned spaces and properties? How can we support the properties now that are non-residentially zoned and provide them opportunities? Because we have a number of properties that have not reached the status of having a vacant building notice, but that are unoccupied, the same way that we have unoccupied residential properties. And how can we prevent those from becoming nuisance vacant properties, but how can we, support those becoming occupied or kind of getting a better understanding? On the business side, we need to be thinking about this holistically with all the partners and all the partners that Councilwoman Porter mentioned in her opening comments about how to support the revitalization of these spaces and what is needed to have vibrant commercial corridors and commercial opportunities within our communities. And with that, DHCD stands by our bill report.
Thank you for your comments, and I'll start with the sponsor of the, if you want to start with
Sure.
questions that you might have.
Yes, ma'am. So I did have one question about the distinction between a vacant, the vacant building notices, whether they're placed on commercial, so whether they're placed on commercial spaces. So we're not talking about necessarily the vacant building notices going on the buildings. We're talking about those property developers that allow their buildings to kind of go to a place where it's not, it's leading towards kind of a vacant building notice. So we're really focused, we're focused on the vacant building notices, but we are more geared towards how can we, one, not only incentivize property developers to fix up their spaces before it actually gets to that point, and then from an operations perspective, we know that there are a significant amount of commercial spaces, including vacant lots, that have tens of thousands of citations on them. And so we just want to make sure that we are targeting those properties so that we can, before it gets to the vacant building notice, we repurpose it into something that can be useful for the community.
So I think that is a good distinction. I want to make a couple of key distinctive points on that. Is that at this time, there isn't anything to say that we can cite or create a vacant building notice for a portion of a property, right? So if it's a non-residential property that has a commercial space associated with it, and it's like, well, that property owner hasn't rented that space or hasn't done anything to it yet, and it's kind of just sitting there, they haven't found a tenant yet, or maybe they haven't advertised for a tenant, there isn't a tool that we can use unless that property has become to the point where it is a nuisance property and our code enforcement team is out. That is one reason why there are citations on the properties, because our code enforcement team is out looking for what qualifies and quantifies to place a citation on a building or site for something. In terms of holding a property owner accountable for having a non-residential property or commercial space that just isn't occupied, saying like they're not renting it, that is something that we do not do and cannot do. And that's where those other tools, we have to be thinking about those other tools in terms of how to incentivize occupancy of that property. And we do want to focus on the tools that we do have to try to prevent any of those spaces from becoming, having condition continue to deteriorate. And part of that, I think, is also around the difficulty, just as is sometimes in the residential world, is creating the markets and becoming the support. Because on these commercial properties, a lot of these small commercial properties, they're going to rent the property, and then the tenant and the business is responsible for the fit out and paying for all of that. The owner doesn't pay for that, the tenant does. So it's how can we help support that?
Yeah, and I just want to make a distinction again. So it's not necessarily like forcing property owners to lease. What I am gearing at is when they haven't leased for a particular amount of time, the property is deteriorating, it becomes a nuisance property, and we're seeing it in our commercial spaces whereby, they become hubs of illegal activity. You don't have any windows, you have no doors, you have no roofs. That is really where this is targeting. How can we develop clear guidance of code enforcement that if it gets to a certain level, we step in as a city to redefine that space and repurpose that space for community organizations? Is
that does, and I think that, do you want to say? Well, I think, and Deputy Booker will step in on a couple, but I think that is a clear piece, is that vacant building notice and issuing that vacant building notice, it is what then gives us the different tools to either acquire the property and then repurpose into the community, or sell, to do in-rem, all the different potentials that we have for acquisition. So that's where a key piece is in terms of what would give the city the ability to, as you said, step in to then work to repurpose that into something else, or to have an owner come in that then will maintain the property or have it be a vibrant business and so forth.
Okay, so if it has a vacant building notice on it, do we even know who the property owner is? So I'm.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
By the legal definition of vacant building notice, we still do know who the property owner is.
We know who the property owner is, even if it doesn't have a vacant building notice on it.
Deputy Commissioner Booker, you wanted to add to
But,
that?
yeah, the only thing that I would add is that a vacant building is a vacant building, whether it's commercial or residential. We treat it the same, so if it fits the criteria for a vacant building notice, regardless of commercial or residential, we will, in fact, issue that notice and/or citation where appropriate.
And I'll save my other questions.
Thank you. And I have a list here of committee members that wanted to say something. We'll start with Stokes was first.
Thank you. I just want to mention, March the 12th of last year, I introduced a bill about a blight elimination task force because I know how hard my colleagues work to eliminate these vacant houses, but it ain't changed. And the task force actually has 26 members, but 9 of them are ex officio, 3 of them are appointed by code enforcement, CAO office, and housing. The other 14 are appointed by these 14 council members to sit on that task force to address the vacant house notice, because we can raise all the fines we want. Guess what? Miss Susie still lives next door to a vacant house with squatters, no roof, a dirty yard, mold. The way that's set up, it doesn't work. I've been around this long enough to know we can sit here and have all the hearings we want, talk about what we're going to do. My colleague raised a fine to $1,000. The house still going to be vacant when our seniors live next door. It doesn't change. What the task force does is it includes everybody, the liquor board, code enforcement, all those agencies, but the community is sitting in the room when they got to live next door to those toxic buildings they live next door to. They're sitting in the room, those 14 members of the community who are appointed by the 14 council members have more say-so in why they still why the property hasn't changed, why we raised the fine, why we having this conversation, but they still are, it hasn't changed. So the idea is bring the community in, have those 3 agencies, code enforcement, housing, and CEO, and 14 people that live around this whole city that can sit in the room and have the power to make a decision about the vacant houses they've been living next to for 20 years. If we don't use this task force, we're going to come back here again, we're going to have another meeting, and we're going to be talking and talking. We're going to raise the fine to $1,500. But guess what? When you ride down to these poor black and brown neighborhoods, ain't nothing changed. People still living next to those houses that are toxic. So this task force, and I will be having a hearing, and I'll be glad to work with housing on this and the administration, because if we don't establish this, we're going to just keep having conversations. The other piece is we need to talk to our legislators in Annapolis, because a lot of the stuff that we're dealing with the city about changing, that has to come from the state also. They need to be part of this conversation. So thank you.
Any comments for the councilman's statement? Hearing none. Councilwoman Ramos.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Commissioner, and also thank you, Councilwoman Porter, for putting this in. I'm excited about the tools that we have now with the new in-rem tool. That there should be, I think, some more hearings tomorrow to be able to, every last Wednesday of the month, to be able to get these vacant houses out of the hands of private owners and into the hands of the city to be able to do something with. My question is about the properties that the councilwoman was talking about that do not have VBNs, that are vacant building notices. They don't rise to that level. But we have landlords, particularly in our commercial corridor, that they're not doing anything with it, or they don't know what they're doing, or they're holding it for something, but it's bringing the community down. I have a very specific situation, as you know, on Greenmount Avenue. We have an interesting set of folks that are willing to come in and do work that needs to be done along the Greenmount corridor, the Waverly Main Street corridor, but they're not moving there because we've got a guy that's holding onto the properties. They're going to move down, at least they're staying in the neighborhood, but they're moving down the block. Completely and totally unfair to the community, right? My question is this: why can't we lower the threshold for VBN? Meaning, currently, the definition to get a VBN, because once we have the property established with a vacant building notice, all of our tools can kick in, right? In-rem kicks in, receivership kicks in, all of that. These buildings are such that the windows might not be broken, but there might be some graffiti. The roof, might look okay, and it looks decent, but nothing's getting done there, right? So the question is, can we lower the threshold for VBN so that maybe look at no mail as being delivered, right? Now, that's a tricky one, right? Because obviously if you're waiting for a building to sell, there's probably not going to be any mail, right? Or no utilities or something, because we can't even cite this guy because I can't get high grass and weeds. I don't have grass on Greenmount Avenue, right? So it's extremely frustrating, and I'm sure my colleague is also very frustrated because she does have some Main Street areas as well. We need to figure out a way to modify that particular designation if that designation is such that then our tools kick in. So is there any way that we could, now I get that our definition that we have is there on purpose, right? Because it is a blight elimination, and technically these might not be blight, even though there's nothing happening in them, and can then lower into blight. But we've got to do something regarding this, and I think one way to do it is to lower the threshold for VBN.
So I think one of the key things that we have done, and I'm going to just say like a sentence and then actually have Deputy Hessler talk about this a little bit, but one of the things that has been successful in some cases, and that situation that you have, Councilman, on Greenmount, is one where any kind of private negotiations, et cetera, is not working to move that property. But we have been successful in other areas, and I think that also goes to the piece, especially for non-residential, about also because it's a little bit different of a market when we're talking about who then can move into that, because it necessarily isn't a lot of commercial landlords. They're not in it to own a building to then operate a business out of it themselves, meaning it's not that they haven't figured out what to do with it, like what business they want to open tomorrow. Sometimes it is having the businesses that want to be in the community on that block and are able to have that business and so forth, and talking to that person about, and we have had success about, we have people that want to rent. Do you want to rent? Can we get this going so this is no longer a vacant commercial space? So I think part of it comes into play about not just the definition of the vacant building, but also all of the other components around incentivizing both the landlord and businesses to open and take over space, renovate them, do the tenant fit out, et cetera. Deputy Hessler, can you?
Yeah, I was just going to expand a little bit on the vacant building definition. With our agency, DHCD, working with the council, it was either 10 or 12 years ago, did expand the definition. So in doing that, we created what we refer to as a nuisance vacant property, which allows us to issue a vacant building notice on an establishment similar to what you're discussing if over the course of 12 months, there are sanitation-related citations issued on 6 separate occasions, or there are violations outstanding on the property, at least 2 violations, and that's 2 items. So it could be that there's graffiti on the walls and a hanging downspout or something of that nature. But if there are 2 items that are outstanding for what would amount to 40 days, the property could qualify under that nuisance piece. We passed that 10 to 12 years ago, so it may be something to look back at, revisit, and see if there's changes needed there, I'm not sure the no mail, no utilities is the right route to go necessarily, but we can have that discussion and see. But we do issue citations under the nuisance vacant, which then gets the vacant building notice on the property and allows us to use the other tools that we have.
Great. So can I follow up with that? That then, so the 311s that go in, there is no choice to say nuisance property on the 311. So it would just be based on the 311s that, you know, normally would get. I mean, the challenge is high grass and weeds is a popular one. I have no grass on Greenman Avenue. Okay. I've got weeds through the sidewalk of grass. So,
It definitely was created during the mortgage crisis and to address residential, like zombie properties. That was definitely like the original idea behind it, is to try and get to these residential properties that maybe the neighbors are cutting the grass and picking up the newspapers, but the property's rotting from the inside out because the owners walked away and the bank hasn't foreclosed yet, and the community's gonna be left with something devastating, and we won't be able to issue a vacant building notice on it until the windows fall out.
Right.
So that was the original planning around changing the definition, and so we can look at it again from the angle of commercial properties.
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful and a good outcome from here to have those conversations about that, not just the nuisance part, but like refining that specifically for commercial properties as well.
Deputy Booker, do you want to talk a little bit about the officers in the commercial quarters looking for those?
Sure. So it's, while we see those as violations and technical violations, it might not be something that we look at all the time, the little small things, considering that there's broader issues sometimes in those corridors. So it's just a matter from an operational standpoint of tightening the focus to zero in on those things that we would overlook because there are greater problems within the footprint or within that space. And that's just an operational adjustment that we can do currently. And as we talk more about the existing law, the nuisance piece, whatever we tighten it up to, we can adjust it operationally to focus there.
And you have, if I can follow up, you have, yes, you have, your inspectors are for commercial and residential,
Yeah,
so you don't have like specialists on, yeah.
I want to make this distinction clear. They are property maintenance inspectors, right? Their certification is property maintenance inspector, so it's property, period. It doesn't have to be residential specifically or commercial specifically. Historically, some of that cloud came in because we were housing inspectors.
Right.
And many moons ago when I came on board, I felt that branding was wrong, so we changed it to housing code enforcement. But right now, Assistant Commissioner Yates is over the property maintenance section of the division because we make no distinction between commercial or residential as property, period. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thanks. I want to get into this conversation, off of this.
So council members Stokes and Porter will come back around because I know you
I have another
had
question
some
too.
questions on that, but we want to hear from Conway and then Dorsey. And I want to recognize a sponsor of the next bill that's with us, Christopher Burnett of the 8th District.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you guys were talking, I had a couple of thoughts, and in reading through the bill report, you guys mentioned that there is a yearly registration statement for business properties. Is there any way that, or do we notify folks when we notice that there's a new vacancy in a given area? Do we keep track of that?
A new vacant building notice, or just a commercial property where a tenant has moved out and now a commercial storefront is available for rent?
The latter, when we know that a particular building does not have a tenant.
So we don't have that because in DHCD, like, we don't have a way to track that. Like, that isn't anything that we monitor in any way, because that's kind of on the private side of real estate transactions in terms of somebody moves out and somebody moves in. A lot of times I do see that Main Street managers in our Main Street corridors, community development corporations, community organizations might even put on a listserv, hey, so-and-so moved out, and you know, that space is now available. Does anybody know of anyone that wants to rent it? And often those spaces, depending upon the size, are put out for lease on the multiple listserv, available through real estate agents, some of the commercial properties, and so forth. But with us at the city, and specifically at DHCD, we don't monitor private real estate transactions like that.
Sure. For the yearly registration piece, do we capture whether or not a building is occupied or has a tenant or not?
So there is no yearly registration for commercial properties unless they are vacant. Baltimore City has a non-owner occupied property registration requirement, which applies to all residential units that are non-owner occupied, and any vacant buildings, whether it's commercial, residential, otherwise. So that the only ones that would be registered are ones that have a vacant building notice on them.
Got it. A little bit of logic for why I asked that question. I think we all know that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure of sorts. If we can identify buildings that are vacant and work whatever networks or opportunities we can to help fill those, I know certainly as a council member, if I'm able to figure out a reasonable tenant or a desired tenant, for instance, if I'm trying to find a grocery store, I would certainly love to take on that opportunity before it's vacant beyond repair, before they have structural damage with the building and otherwise. To Commissioner, your point earlier about vacant residential properties, and if they're vacant for too long, they become a nuisance vacant, and then eventually we have to tear them down. If there's something that we could do once we know that we have a vacant building, that would help us prevent it from getting to a point beyond repair, I would love to figure out if there is a way for us to have a system for that. Maybe there isn't. Maybe that registration system can be tweaked, but just a thought of mine. My second question, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that as an idea.
No, I think I would say I would go back to part of my opening statement in terms of looking at needing to have all of the partners in the room, both from city agencies as well as our nonprofit, our community development, our community members, to look at the ways that we can incentivize and support businesses, right, in very different economic stages of economic growth and the current, you know, economics across the city in terms of businesses that want to open and have a commercial storefront and what that means, and helping to support in that. That having a robust system and looking to some of our partners like Main Streets, like BDC, Downtown Partnership, et cetera, to help provide some of that and some of those resources and becoming matchmakers. I will say one of the items that I forgot to mention when thinking about this is that there have been some, you know, recent zoning code changes that have expanded some of the zoning definitions, and that will also help us with some of our local businesses, specifically in our maker community. And, you know, a goal of mine, I had a brief conversation with Mr. Cook from Made in Baltimore, and we will be following up in the next couple months on a stronger meeting about that, looking at even the commercial non-residential buildings that do have VBNs, or ones that where we can, what tool we're going to use in the toolbox to start to look at putting any that qualify, where he can also play as a matchmaker for businesses to want to be in the city, to want to work in the city, and if any of those meet zoning requirements, to kind of play a matchmaker from that standpoint, so that we acquire the more that we acquire on the non-residential side, that it's the same when we think about building the pipeline for vacant buildings on the residential side. We need to build a pipeline for the non-residential side as much as we would build a pipeline for the residential side. So what businesses are out there, what landlords, trying to support, because you can have greater wealth building if the business owner can purchase the property themselves, and have that as, that's another way to think about wealth generation in the city, so they're not relying on a property owner to rent the space for their business, but how can we also support the sale and ownership from that standpoint as well.
One more question, if that's okay. My other question is also thinking about, we talked a lot about the stick. I'm trying to think about the carrot, how we can help people comply so that we don't have to necessarily resort to fines and otherwise to get people to change. Do we offer support to properties that are beginning to slide? Or are there programs that we can direct people to if they find themselves unable to meet the maintenance needs?
There are several programs out there. We have, even our Community Catalyst Grant program has been supportive of businesses needing to do repair and so forth. This is one of those pieces that is a little bit different for those that are familiar with commercial and non-residential leases. And I mentioned this on a call yesterday. I can speak to this personally. My wife owns a small business in one of our neighborhoods in the city, and how those leases are built, right? A significant portion of parts of a building that may start to deteriorate are on the business owner, not on the property owner for repair. So a lot of our non-residential buildings and property owners push as much as possible for maintenance of their building onto the tenants and the businesses within the building, even down to hot water heaters or furnaces or windows, different pieces. So it is about not just the property owner side, but that's why I keep coming back to as much as we can do at the local level and the state level. The state has a significant number of programs available as well to support our businesses and commercial entities with repairs, maintenance, and upkeep, as well as how best to support them in their space. And then there's also holding property owners accountable for the items that Deputy Hessler and Deputy Booker stated as well. So there's a combination of both.
And for clarity, is there a difference between the residential programs we offer and the commercial programs we offer?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Before we go to Dorsey and then Bullock, I just want to, the law department, just something just popped up as listening to this conversation. Are there any legal ramifications with doing things differently with commercial versus residential?
It depends on what things we're talking about. Are you talking about like government treatment of them or the landlord's treatment of the tenant?
Basically both.
Well, it would depend. It depends. Like, there's plenty of state law about residential tenants and what landlords are able to sort of push off on them that don't all apply to commercial tenants. One that comes to mind at the moment is jury trials. Like, there's certain things that landlords of residential properties can't ask tenants to do that wouldn't necessarily be the case in a commercial setting. So it just depends on what the particular things are.
Right. Thank you for that clarification. Councilman Dorsey?
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple questions about how we follow up on VBNs. First of all, not everybody here knows this. I recently did a pretty deep dive into how parking enforcement is conducted and was surprised to learn that if you are a member of the public or a member, anybody in this room, and you utilize the 311 app and take photographs of parking violations, the people who actually inspect parking violations in response to that never ever have any chance at all that they are going to see those photographs that you took the time to take and put into 311. They never, under any circumstance, see those photographs, which is totally crazy. I just want to check first and foremost, when I take a photograph with the 311 app of a problem, does the DHCD inspector who goes out to look at that see that photograph, and do they read the notes?
Good afternoon.
Hi.
Yes, I can contest that when you do put your photos in 311, we are getting those photos. Our assistant superintendents will pull, and our office support specialists do pull those 311s. And when we do pull them, we will triage, the management team will triage before assigning to the inspectors. And the inspectors are protocol for them to read over the notes prior to going out. So they do research prior to going out to the field before conducting an investigation.
And they're seeing the photographs, like when they're in the field, they're able to go, I'm here, I see this photograph, I see it showing a problem, where is this? I'm here basically just to look and see that this actually exists.
So in most cases, if the photo is put into 311, we are seeing the photo, as long as if it's in 311.
The inspector in the field
Inspector.
while they're in the field.
Yes.
Okay.
But inspectors are trained not just to look at what you put in, they'll look at the whole property to see if there's other violations as well.
Because I've got plenty of cases where, like, I take a photograph and I took a photograph at the site where it was there. I know it's there. And I go back the next day after it's closed and they say no violation found. And I'm going, I don't know how you were here and didn't see the same thing that's plain as day, but it's still there. To your other point about being trained to look around, I also see cases where I take the photograph and I didn't realize it was 5 feet this side of a property line versus 5 feet this side of a property line when it was a little unclear, and it gets closed, no violation found. And I had cases where it was like, yeah, it wasn't on that property, it was on this other property. Okay, well, you didn't cite the other property and the problem's still there. I got one where I reported it personally like 4 times, and it's still there today, like 2 years after I started reporting it. My main point in asking about this was basically just to make sure that they are seeing the photographs, that that's somehow working. My big question about VBNs is my experience is that we don't have a systematized way of following up on VBNs at the point at which the deadline has passed. I look at VBNs and they say you got to fix this problem within 10 days or 15 days or 30 days or whatever it is, and I look at the date, and that was 6 months ago or 2 months ago or 5 months ago or a year or 2 years ago, and there was never any follow-up that happened in a systematized way. What is our system for saying, I issued a VBN, it gives you this many days, we are going back after that many days?
So I'll let Deputy Booker talk about this a little bit, but the mechanism is the failure to abate notice that would be issued on that property. And we've actually, that has been something that we've changed in terms of policy within the agency over the last 2 years.
Okay.
And have had a significant increase, actually is it like 430% increase in the failure to abate citations that have been from over a 400% increase in citations issued in 2022 over 2021. And Deputy Booker, do you want to?
Yeah, I don't know exactly how it's systematized that we're going to go back and actually issue those after the expiration of the VBN.
Thanks, Councilman. Let me react to that question. Operationally, the way the system is set up, when a notice is issued, it comes back up for a reinspection. In addition to reinspecting open notices, which are problems that we have in fact identified, on top of that, we get the 311 request. So we have, an inspector has not only the open notices, but also the service requests that they have to respond to in their respective territory. Our ability to get back to them within that time frame is directly connected to our bandwidth. Our bandwidth, our inspector boots on the ground bandwidth. Okay. When I am not at what I consider mission capable strength, so ideally I have 80 inspectors, ideally. We have 64 territories. When I have 80, ideally there's an inspector in every territory, and then I have the flexibility for a special operations unit, and then we have rent inspectors, rent escrow inspectors. When my strength takes a hit because inspectors leave because of safety in Baltimore City, they decide they want to go to DC, wherever, I have to make operational decisions to remove some of that operational burden. So you end up having an inspector that may be covering 2 territories and somebody else that's helping out with the 311 request. So as my division strength reduces because we're trying to bring more people back on the backfill, it gets spread out, so they might not get reacted to timely. Then there are decisions operationally that have to be made when your strength gets so low where you're not what I consider mission capable, where there's some things that we just have to wait and hope we don't take a hit on them. One thing that we don't drop the ball on is 311s, because those are requests that are coming from our citizens saying that there is a problem, in fact, that we need to react to. Sometimes our re-inspections get behind because we don't have enough personnel filling the territories to actually handle the demand of.
So you said ideally you'd have 80. How many do you have right now?
We have 54 inspectors.
54?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'll follow up with you about that. I have just a question. A couple.
Correction. I was just corrected. It's 50 inspectors right
50. Thank you. I have just a little thing about permits real quick.
Sure.
Because we can't turn properties around if we can't hand people the permits, and permitting is the most notoriously awful problem that we have as a city in terms of how people interface with trying to do business through the city, as far as I'm concerned, as far as what are the office hours for permits? And are there different office hours for the left side when I go in the door versus the right side when I go in the door?
So, Councilman, just so you know, we do have a sponsor, Ramos, that has a hearing particularly on that. So we can have the short answer, and then we can move on.
Thank you.
Deputy Hessler, do you want to take that? We'll go over hours and so forth, but anybody and all permits are done online. So that they're, unless there's a specific piece, so.
Let me cut to the chase then. My problem is that I have a constituent who is trying to get a permit for a city-owned property that they have a lease for, a nonprofit, Main Streets, and they're trying to get a permit to do electrical work for a month. And when their electrical contractor couldn't log in, though they had a login and password for the e-permit system, and then reset the password, it still didn't work. Nobody responded to multiple phone calls to the number online that says, call here if you're having a problem. There's an email address. They don't get a response. They finally, after weeks, went into the office, and they showed up at 2:45, and the only person who was working there was on their way out the door. And I'm pretty sure that office doesn't close at 2:45. And it's like weeks later, and they still don't have a permit. And it just seems to me like this office is just like flying by the seat of their pants or something. And is there somebody that actually is supposed to answer that phone or call people back? Because they're not doing it.
So let's quickly answer that, because we are going to have a separate thing just on permits, and I know that's going to take some time. So just a real quick answer so we can, Councilman Bullock's been waiting patiently.
Yep. The office is open to the public from 8:30 to 4. So there should be staff there from 8:30 to 4 every day. We issue 40,000 permits a year. All of them are online and available to be issued online. There are situations where contractors may not be able to access it because their login is expired or they've had other issues. And we do have staff that go through not only the phones and the walk-in clients, but also the message board and emails that come through. But it's a considerable volume, so sometimes there's delays in responding.
I showed up at that office at 3:15 last week after my constituent was there at 2:45 and can tell you that there was nobody working in that office.
And I'm sure someone can maybe work with you after the hearing to discuss
Thank you.
that particular. You're welcome. Councilman Bullock.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and also, again, want to thank Councilwoman Porter for introducing this. Again, I know her area, mine, and others deal with the issue of vacant properties, be they commercial or residential. So again, thank you for doing that. I know most of the questions I already had were asked and answered by my colleagues and your team. But I did have one piece, and I'm glad that you talked about the open notice versus the service request. Can you talk a bit about what percentage, roughly, is it coming from the service request, the 311 request, or just through inspectors traversing the area and seeing some of the conditions? How are the complaints coming to you? Can you talk a little bit about that really quickly?
Yes, sir. Councilman, the way that when we receive a 311 request, the result of the output of that request could be a citation, it could be a notice, it could be a no cause for action, it could be a referral. So anytime the inspector goes out following a 311, there are certain outputs that come as a result of that inspection. They also go out on existing notices. Those are problems that have already been identified that we have to re-inspect and try to get an outcome. When they're out there, not only are they responding to what the citizens put in the system, they're also charged to zone their area. You know, ideally I have an inspector for each territory, and that's on purpose, so that they can learn who is in that footprint and the problems, the trouble spots, so that when they're going out, they have like 10 spaces that might be their trouble spots. So while they might be responding to the 311 and the open notices, they can zone their trouble spots while they're in that footprint, because we always know somebody's dumping at this location. So when they go out, they zone, and that's stuff that they pick up proactively. The reactive stuff comes in through 311, which the outcome from that could be a citation or a notice, no cause for action, or a referral.
And I'm glad that you also mentioned the no cause for action as well, because I know part of the concern that some are going to have is, look, you know, some people may be overzealous in their complaints. There may be unfounded complaints. So there are times where you go out and you may say, hey, this was something that someone reported, but we don't find a cause for action there.
That's exactly right. But while we're there, because the goal and the intent of the inspector is to observe and document, while we're there, because it was a complaint for that spot, eyes are open for whatever violations that may exist at that time before they move on to their next location.
Understood, and I think part of the impetus for asking the question is that, you know, all this is done in an equitable fashion. And to that point, I know some of this is not really on housing who is here, and then also planning is here. But I am curious, Commissioner Kennedy, you had mentioned earlier some of the partners, and I agree with you. Some of those partners need to be here in this conversation, and I think particularly about Baltimore Development Corporation. We do know that some of these commercial property owners may be looking for some improvements, may be looking for assistance, and I think that could really change the game. I know a lot of it in some of our corridors that have been cited, some of it's been around some of the conditions. And I know Councilman Porter and myself are very, very concerned about the derelict property owners, right? But then we do know there have been some limited funds that have come for things like facade improvements. But then to you know, Councilman Conway's point, right? Folks who are looking to have a tenant there. So can you talk a little bit about to what degree you guys partner, or what kind of information is shared, and folks are making those kind of requests? I'm just curious.
Yeah, we have a very strong partnership with BDC. I know that BDC did provide a bill report specific to this bill and the hearing. And we do work with them in coordination on a number of different areas for focusing, you know, either through facade improvement, through outreach, et cetera. One that we're working on right now is Old Town, where we have actually the Department of Planning, Department of Housing Community Development, BDC, working together in terms of outreach and implementation of a number of facade improvement grants for Old Town, where we actually work to get additional money to support those facade improvements. So we do on a regular basis work in conjunction with our partners in terms of both outreach, education, connection. Sometimes it isn't DHCD as the one that's going to provide the grant, but we are the first that are showing up to say, well, we can't do it, but here is how someone else can help and how to act as that connector. That's a key piece of everybody's understanding within DHCD, is that if we're not immediately responsible or immediately can't help, that we don't just hang up or turn away somebody, that we help connect them to somebody that can.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Councilman Bullock. Dan Taylor with BDC, and I wanted to speak on facade improvements as one example. And just this last year, we actually revised our facade improvement program to expand a number of different ways to go beyond what we had done traditionally, which was, you know, a property with a business in it that needs some improvement, we can give them $7,500. One of the new versions that we did, in addition to the Perkins Somerset Old Town FIG that Commissioner Kennedy referenced, was a modified program specifically targeting vacant buildings in need of whole building improvement. We just rolled that out in December. It provides a $15,000 grant, or up to $15,000, for properties that are doing a whole building renovation with at least a $50,000 private investment that results in getting a use and occupancy permit. And so as we looked through these commercial corridors, and this is something we've been doing a lot of over the course of the last year, we really wanted to figure out what sorts of carrots are out there to incentivize the redevelopment of the properties when there's a cooperative property owner, because those are really rare to find a cooperative property owner, and we really want to try to take advantage of someone who says, I need help, I want to fix up my building, I want to get a good tenant in there. So we have the facade improvement program. The state has had a program over the course of the last year and a half, also specifically targeting the commercial occupancy of vacant properties. That was Project Restore, which they had funded a couple times during COVID, and I believe are considering funding on an ongoing basis. And we also serve, there was reference made to it earlier with Made in Baltimore, but we really do like to serve as this matchmaker when we can find a cooperative property owner looking for a tenant with the various businesses that come to us as well, saying, hey, we're a business and we're looking for space, and to serve in that kind of matchmaking capacity.
No, that's very encouraging. And the last thing I'll just say is, you mentioned, and I love the term cooperative property owner. Could you just talk about, you know, how you identify that? Because I think that's something we need to then be doubling down on, because there are folks who want to do some good things. So if you talk about that, and I'll be done.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, in our bill report, we talk about a number of reasons that we have this persistent vacancy, and some of it is, frankly, there are property owners who have no interest in having their properties occupied. They're just not interested in doing it. And those would be our non-cooperative property owners. They're the ones you can't get in touch with, you have to send legal notices to. So it represents some proportion of these commercial property owners that are problematic. But there are a number of property owners, you know, a family ownership, maybe it's changed hands, someone who bought a property looking to flip it and occupy it. And those are these cooperative property owners, which are people who do want to do something with their property. They want it to be a revenue generating, they want it to be a good asset in the community. They want perhaps their valuation to appreciate by getting the neighborhood to appreciate. That's a big motivator. So in terms of strategies of getting in touch with them, this really becomes a hyper-local thing. And it's networks, you know, BDC staff can go out and we can try to get people, but you know, property owners aren't in the shops, right? They're elsewhere. And so trying to find out who they are and making contact through whatever records we have available to us is very helpful. Council people referrals, for example, can be very helpful. Knowing the business and getting to talk if there's a business in place and understanding who the property owner is from that tenant can be very helpful. And then we see huge benefit in things like business improvement districts, groups like Southwest Partnership, where there are people on the ground, paid people, not just, you know, citizens and residents who are invaluable, but people whose job it is to work in these neighborhoods specifically day in and day out, and they're there making those connections at a really, you know, intimate basis, and to use that to then serve as a means of contact back to BDC or elsewhere to try to engage these folks in a positive way and say, here's the carrots, here's the sticks, here's what we all want to see happen, what can we do to make that work?
Thank
Thank you. And before we move on with this, I just want the committee to be mindful of the time. We do have another informational type hearing after this one. And I do want to reiterate the importance, and we do have public testimony to have with this one, but I do want to reiterate the importance of the public to please pay attention to the titles of the bills and the subject matter so we can stay specific to that. You know, a clear example of I don't see the person on there now, but the person that was just saying some terrible things starting off in the chat, it was all about permits. And, you know, to have a council member now to bring up the permits question when we clearly were not talking about permits was another unprofessional move in my eye. But I just want that clear example. We have things that we're doing in a timely manner on a specific subject. So on that note, and before we move on, I know that Councilman Stokes and Councilwoman Ramos and Councilwoman Porter had just some more quick things so we can move on because it is 4:25.
I just have a comment. I don't know if y'all familiar with the 2500 block of Greenmount. Sheriff, I know you know about it. There's a lot of activity. There were city houses that were tore down. And at the time, Major Wells was working with us because this gentleman for 3 years trying to build a housing apartment development there. One person, what Councilwoman Ramos was talking about, said no. We talked to the law department 3 weeks ago. We can't even develop that block because one person who has a vacant building, because we're in the block off the alley, his portion of his building will not be blocked off. And because one person said, no, the building is vacant, he don't use it, we can't even develop that. That would change that whole neighborhood of what's happening in the 2500 block of Greenmount. And I know Councilwoman Odette Ramos and Councilwoman Porter introduced this. I'd like to be a part of that conversation because for 3 years, one person stopped the development in the 2500 block of Greenmount Avenue. Thank you.
That seems to happen quite a lot, not just in 1 or 2 districts.
Well, we talking about ours right now, Councilwoman.
Councilwoman Porter, and any final words?
Yeah,
as
this
well?
is just a final word. You know, Commissioner Kennedy, your team, thank you all so much for doing the amazing work that you do for the city. But the process is clearly broken. The process is clearly broken, and I'm grateful that we had this hearing today. I did not get in the weeds as much as I wanted to with some specific questions. So, you know, I know we are voting this out today, but I really want to have follow-up with you about how we can develop clear guidance, particularly for code enforcements of derelict properties, owners that do not take care of their property. We want to ensure that we are staying on target, staying on task, that we're staying with the same vibrancy that we do with residential. I want to be, a lead on that because I think it's really important that we engage all of the stakeholders in that conversation and really codifying it in language and not just through investigational hearings. So I look forward to working with my colleagues on that account. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilwoman Ramos?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks again to my colleague for introducing this and also for housing folks. Just a quick note, I did introduce a resolution for a hearing on the permit issues, so we will be having that hearing at some point. The question I had is similar to what Councilman Conway was talking about. There had been some conversations early on in our term about doing a storefront, an empty storefront registry, but doing it in a way that if the owner of the property doesn't register their property, because obviously people would know that there's a business available if there's a registry, if that person lists, and then instead of folks having to pay to register, it would be a reverse of that, saying you didn't register, so you're going to pay, right? And the RBDL, we ran into the issue where the RBDL already exists in parts of the city, but not the whole city. And we could do something like that in the current RBDLs, but we'd have to then expand to some of the other, like my area is not an RBDL. So, and I forget what RBDL stands for, so you're going to help us with that. So can we talk a little bit about whether that's a possibility of doing some kind of empty storefront registry, but in the reverse, where like you've got to list, and if you're not going to list, then you're going to have to pay. Like, you know, and just talk a little bit about that. And I'm talking, I'm seeing you, Commissioner, but I'm so, right.
Yeah, so I certainly don't know the kind of legal ability for us to require this or penalize people for not doing it. You know, as it relates to the RBDL,
I think one of our colleagues has this bill, but I'm not sure where that is.
Well, so what I was going to say is the retail business districts, the retail business license district, is a license that is required for businesses to register, essentially get a license to operate their business in those areas. And that is enforced by an annual inventory of those commercial areas to see what businesses are there. And then those businesses are charged a fee, and that fee goes back to the business association in the particular area and is meant to fund improvements for the area in general. It's really a precursor, you know, dating back to probably the 70s, to business improvement districts, which are the more modern form of that. But there's nothing, you know, currently that would require the storefronts themselves to register or for properties in commercial districts as a whole to register. Certainly the idea behind an empty storefront registry, I think, is wonderful. It would make my team's job much, much easier because we would know what's out there. We've in fact been trying to do this a little bit the last couple months, just testing it out when we walk, you know, neighborhood X and do a property by property inventory and say, who's there, what's occupied, what's vacant, what's the story, and try and figure it out from there. So in terms of whether that is something that could be required of property owners, I think is a question for legal minds to figure out, but I think it's a good conversation to have because I think there's a lot of benefit to it.
Okay, well, we'll definitely follow up. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. I will now call those who have signed up to testify. We'll start with Catherine Howard. She's still here?
She's in the next bill.
Oh, the next. Oh, okay. Oh, gotcha. Okay, we have one. Peter Duval. You've been standing up there back and patiently pacing back and forth.
Yes,
Have your
sorry about that.
That's okay. You have your 3
I'm a
minutes.
pacer in general.
You can pull that down.
Yes.
closer.
Peter Duvall, Community Development Services, and I work in various neighborhoods, but I'm not going to mention any of them because I'm not testifying for any of them in particular. Over the years, I've had a concern about commercial property owners boarding their properties, and the inspectors have told me that they believe that in many cases that boarding a commercial property is not a code violation. And that's probably true because I report it all the time and don't get violation notices. Oftentimes I'll report that a building that's has graffiti and the whole front is boarded, and I'll get the notice for just graffiti. So, and that keeps me from getting asking for a nuisance vacancy in the long run because I can only ever get one violation against the property. So I wrote up some written testimony. I'll hand that to you. It has some various properties that I've reported over the years and recently that
Thank you.
that didn't get violations for the boarding and that did get violations for other things. So I know the inspectors were there. So
Thank you. We'll
okay,
make sure
and
it's
I
in
think
the
that's a
file.
problem because they look terrible.
Thank you for your
Thanks.
testimony. Okay, if you are online and would like to testify, please raise your hand. For the people online, raise your hand. And we have no hands raised. Oh, wait a minute. 1, Debbie Allie Dickerson. Debbie, are you
Hello?
there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, you're on.
Okay, thanks. Hi, my name is Debbie Allie Dickerson. My husband and I own a property in Pigtown, 762 on Washington Boulevard. Not only is this our business, work, printing, and graphics, located on the ground floor, but we also live above on the second floor of the property. Vacant properties such as the empty bank building, which is directly next to us on 764 Washington Boulevard, and the property at 1011 Berry Street have had a negative impact on our business. The visual impact of these vacant and neglected properties give the impression that the neighborhood is unsafe and that it's in decline. The vestibules of these vacant storefronts are often used by homeless individuals and drug users. We've actually had clients tell us that they are scared to come into our neighborhood to pick up their order. The property at 1011 Berry Street in particular is an eyesore and is even unpleasant to walk by. Graffiti covers the walls, trash, piles of dead leaves, and broken glass constantly litter the sidewalks around this property. As a business and a property owner, I have a vested interest in this neighborhood. My husband and I have invested time and money in our property. These empty and neglected storefronts bring down the value of our property and are a visible detraction for all that live in and visit the neighborhood. The owners absolutely need to be held accountable. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more raised hands at this point? Scott Cashnow?
Yeah, thanks. Hi, this is Scott Cashnow. Again, I live in Franklin Square neighborhood. I really just want to I sent in some written testimony last night. I'm not going to go over that again. You have it in front of you already. But I wanted to thank you for having this hearing. And I wanted to raise up also a point that Councilwoman Ramos brought up and others were asking about, like an early warning system towards these vacant building issues. And one of the things that does come up regularly is the mail delivery. The utilities might be another thing to bring up again. I just want to raise those up as like early warning systems as potential for giving us some guidance on how to address this, because it really is a very important issue to address. And I thank you for bringing it up and for talking about it today.
Thank you. Any more hands raised? Go back. Brittany Banks? Brittany Banks.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Brittany Banks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Hi, I am a Pigtown resident. I moved to Baltimore 2 years ago as a homeowner and invested in Baltimore City, specifically the Pigtown community. I am speaking today because I am in support of the bill that Councilman Porter has introduced to this council to hold commercial property owners responsible and accountable for their lack of maintenance and upkeep or willingness to sell or rent out vacant buildings in our neighborhood. It is counterintuitive for our neighborhood association and also Pigtown Main Street and other community groups that are fighting so hard to increase the economic development and visual and just live, work, play economic status of our neighborhood without the support of the city holding these property owners accountable. And so I'm just speaking today in support of this bill, and thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony. Any more hands raised? I don't see any. So now we're going to unmute you for telephone callers. Casey O'Neill. Casey O'Neill, you're on. I see you wrote something in the chat that we see, but did you want to testify?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, you're on.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate what Brittany Banks said, as well as the woman that spoke for work printing. I also live in Pigtown. I bought my home about 6 years ago, and I think that one of the biggest detractors for our neighborhood and the ongoing growth and development within our neighborhood is the vacant commercial buildings, and the fact that we are not able to currently hold them accountable based on whatever laws are in place. I think this legislation is a great step in the right direction to hopefully getting some more movement on these buildings that just sit empty for years on end.
Thank you so much. Any more telephone callers? Someone with the last name Hudson? No response from Hudson. Marmikic? Sorry if I pronounced your name wrong. Did you want to testify? Marmikic?
No, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you. Raquel Zuniga? Raquel Zuniga, going twice. And no response. Nicole. Nicole. And I think Nicole was the person that had put information. Hello, Nicole?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, are you the person?
Thank you, Councilwoman. I'm sorry about the permit issue, but I just, the whole thing is very, very, very frustrating to me. And I'm glad that we're going to have a hearing regarding it, because we really need to have it addressed in the city, because we have developers that have been waiting for permits for months, and it's really ridiculous. But thank you for hearing me out.
You're welcome. And checking one last time. Someone named Sam, did you want to testify? Okay, and I think the sponsor of the bill, Councilwoman Porter, a very informative, informational hearing, and I think you wanted to just recognize some written testimony that we have.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. So we've had significant written testimony, not only from businesses and residents in Pigtown, such as Pigtown Main Street. We have Paul's Place, but we also have business ownership from the Brooklyn area, and also those in support of the legislation down in the Brooklyn and Curtis Bay area. And so I'd finally just like to say, even though, we heard majority of people from businesses and residents from Pigtown, I just want to highlight that this is an issue all across the city, and I'm sure that each of my colleagues has examples of how this type of legislation would really help their commercial corridors and true neighborhood revitalization. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you. So the committee heard testimony, recommendations, staff reports. Is there a motion to move this bill?
So moved.
Second.
By committee member.
Oh, so moved.
Second.
Okay, Ramos, and second by Conway. Chair Middleton, yes. Bullock.
Yes.
Yes. Conway.
Yes.
Is a yes. Dorsey.
Yes.
Is a yes. Glover absent. Ramos? Yes. Is a yes. And Stokes? Yes. Is a yes. This bill will move to second reader at the next council member. Thank you so much for all the great information and the people waiting. And our last bill, thank you, sponsor, Chris, Councilman Burnett, for being so patient. We now have the final bill, number 22-0128R, Investigational Hearing Emergency Rental Assistance Program, for the purpose of inviting representatives from the Baltimore Sheriff's Office, the District Office of Maryland for Baltimore City, the Mayor's Office of Children and Family Success, and other interested parties to brief the City Council on the use of Emergency Rental Assistance Program, ERAP, funds in Baltimore City, including a conversation on declining of ERAP funds by management companies and private landlords in Baltimore City. This bill was introduced on September 12th. The bill sponsor, Councilmember Burnett. Councilmember Burnett, you're on.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. So I'll keep my remarks short. Wanted to bring this forward to have a conversation about this particular program, get an update on where we stand as far as the expenditure of local, state, and federal funds to stand up this critical program that frankly was a lifeline for many residents during the height of the pandemic. My office was getting a ton of calls over the last few years, and still have a few trickling in from folks who were experiencing financial hardship, unable to pay rent, and looking for the resources we have available through the Mayor's Office of Children and Family Success to stabilize their housing situation. And so I thought it was important to get an update on where things stand with this particular program, as well as a bit of a conversation about some of the both successes and challenges. Successes being, how many folks were we able to provide support for, long-term funding for this program, like just the general sustainability of it. And then some of the challenges I know that came up pretty frequently in our office was acceptance of funds or trying to provide direct assistance to tenants to stabilize their housing, particularly in situations where the landlord may choose to decline to accept those funds for any number of reasons. We knew that was a challenge for folks as well. So wanted to just have an updated conversation on where we stand and where we're headed moving forward. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And now the committee will hear from agency representatives, and we'll start with the city solicitor, Law Department.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hillary Ruley on behalf of the Law Department, and we stand by our report, no issue.
Thank you. And now we have the Sheriff's Office and our new Sheriff, Sam Cogan.
So thank you for inviting me, and it's a great bill. I guess I'm here to answer any questions anyone may have of me. I appreciate the council inviting me, and I stand by ready to answer any questions.
Thank you. And then the Mayor's Office of Family and Children Success. Any comments? Yes, please identify yourself.
Yes, good afternoon, Dr. Brooks, the Executive Director of the Mayor's Office of Children and Family Success, and we stand by our report.
Thank you. And I see two other people here. You want to identify yourselves?
Nicole Hart, Deputy Commissioner, DHCD, and we were the first agency during COVID to do the temporary rent support, which was paid by the CARES Act funding, and then Mayor's Office of Children and Family Success picked up with the rest of the funds. So just here to be in support and answer any questions in regards to the initial effort to provide rent support.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Angela Whitaker, and I am the director for the Baltimore City Community Action Partnership, and we are the agency under MOCFS that administer the rent support program after DHCD.
Thank you. Do committee members have any comments or questions at this point?
Yeah, I have one.
Yes.
Real quick, I just want to mention, and I know how hard BCAP persons work over there, and a lot of times I had to do my own investigation in terms of finding out if the paperwork was complete. And a lot of times, the tenants, the owners, do not turn in the paperwork. And they request it from them over and over and over. I got emails and texts from the landlords. That's not a nice text saying BCAP or some other agency, not trying to make sure that these tenants' rent get paid. And then when I call them back, we find out that the actual landlords didn't complete the paperwork, so they're held up. Their tenants about being evicted, being out on the street, or getting their rental assistance, or other programs that BCAP offer to them. You might hear them end up out on the street because a lot of times the own landlords do not complete the paperwork that's required. Thank you.
Does anyone want to respond to that statement? Or is there, or share some improvements that you have done or changes? And you can start.
So thank you, Councilman, for sharing that. So we have actually programmatically put some additional supports in place because of some of those barriers where we have had some landlords that have not agreed to sign the rental agreements. And so we do have direct-to-tenant payments where we will provide the tenant with those payments so that they can make those payments for any late payments so that they will not be evicted. We've also provided assistance with relocation payments as well as security deposit assistance so that we can assist the tenants in those ways as well. We've also tried to work very diligently with the landlords to ensure them and work with them on any type of discrepancies that we found on any applications so that we can avoid any type of evictions for the tenants.
Thank you for that. Any other? Yes, Councilman Burnett.
Thank you. So I wanted to start with, I guess, the success of this program. So do you, and if you don't have this, I just would submit it as a committee request or request for information, but how many evictions were avoided through this program? And any success stories that you can share with the committee since the last time we had this discussion on this program.
So thank you. So as of December 31st, we have been able to assist over 12,000 households to avoid eviction with assisting with this program. We have been able to process and receive over 46,000 applications and work very diligently with those applicants to be able to support those applicants so that they would not be evicted. We have dispersed and assisted approximately $75.2 million in supporting our families, and we are dispersing at a rate of about $650,000 weekly to be able to support our families with not being evicted.
Awful lot of money. That's good.
Ooh, sorry, what was the last number?
Which number?
The last number?
Weekly?
$650,000 weekly, the funds, to be able to support our families.
That's impressive. Thank you for that. And I want to piggyback on, from the next side of the question on this is piggybacking on Councilmember Stokes' line of questioning around trying to find ways to get direct payments to tenants. Can you talk to us just generally, like, what are the requirements that tenants have to meet in this situation to receive the direct payment? And what safeguards are in place to make sure that the payments are actually getting to the landlord, or if there are any other like barriers, contractual barriers that you've seen to try and that have prevented the ability to close the loop on this between getting the funds to the tenant in the first place there's obviously some issues that all of us have gotten emails about, but then on the back end, what are some other things that you're still trying to make improvements on to close the loop and make sure everybody's whole? Tenants in the house, landlords paid. What are some barriers that you guys have been able to overcome and things that may still remain?
Sure. Obviously, like our first priority or our first choice is to get the payments directly to the landlords. But as shared, there are challenges sometimes with that. Sometimes we have landlords who decide that they don't want to participate in the program or who are slow to respond. And so the requirements to meet the direct-to-tenant are actually the same requirements as to qualify for the program in general. The only other thing that the tenants have to do to be eligible for direct-to-tenant is to have a landlord who decides that they don't want to participate or who is non-responsive. And so what we do there is we reach out to the landlord in a multiple of ways. We try to connect with them through our neighborly portal. If they're non-responsive, we'll reach out via email, text, and telephone calls. And then if we aren't able to get a response, we will proceed with the direct-to-tenant payment. What we do with the direct-to-tenant payment based on federal guidelines is we collect all of the documentation from the tenants, and then we give them the payment directly. Based on federal guidelines, we're not allowed to kind of police the tenants to make sure that they pay the landlord directly, but we will follow up with the tenant and the landlord, and sometimes we check with our partners at the Baltimore City Sheriff's Office to see if they were removed from the eviction list.
Okay, thank you. Those are my first two questions, Madam Chair.
Councilwoman Ramos.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Councilman, for putting this in. We did have a hearing about a year and a half ago with your predecessor, and she had let us know at that time that that the agency was only giving out, was able to send out payments about $4,000 a month, and so this number of $650,000 weekly is significantly higher. I'm assuming you've gained capacity at that point since then. And have been able to catch up because there were at that time so many people on a waiting list. So are there people still waiting? So I guess that's the crux of my question. Are there people still waiting to have their applications processed? Because I think I send at least twice a week. I send. We get emails from tenants or landlords that still haven't received payment. So I'm curious what the backlog is and how quickly are we getting those out?
So there are still people waiting, and I don't think that I would necessarily call it a backlog, but I will say that that is one of the barriers that we face, the high volume of need in Baltimore City overall. And we have multiple of our applicants who reapply because they continue to struggle with the impacts of COVID. And so we are continuing to process new applications. We are processing applications of applicants who are coming back for second and third tranches of money because they are still significantly impacted by COVID.
But so what's the processing time?
So what we are also doing is prioritizing. So those that are in imminent danger of being evicted, we are moving those to the top. So there may be some that have said, I've been waiting to hear back. And so we're looking to make sure that those that are facing imminent eviction, that we're processing there so that they're not being evicted. As Director Whitaker said, we have some that are duplicate. So we've had some constituents that have called and said, I put in my application, and when we go in, we see that they have multiple applications. And so we're working with those constituents to say, okay, well, we see 3 different applications in for you. Let's look at the one that is the most current and has the most information in and work with those. So I want to say, I'll hand it back to Angela so that she can give the most up-to-date processing time, because we have hired also additional staff so that we can increase the processing time. But just as Director Whitaker said, we are receiving so many duplicate and repeating constituents that are coming back again for some additional assistance.
Well, I would contend that people are applying multiple times because they're not hearing back from folks. So that might be like multiple applications because they thought maybe you didn't get it because they may not have heard back. And then there's the issue of they're still, months afterwards, still, addressing they still have a need.
Right, so first I'll address, I just want to add on to Dr. Brooks about the prioritization. And the prioritization is actually mandated by the legislation, and so it is the imminent eviction, 90 days of unemployment of anybody in the household. And so we have to process based on those first. And so some applications that meet all of those requirements will see a processing time maybe of about 30 days. And then the other thing is that we do communicate regularly with the tenants, but because of the volume, we're not able to communicate verbally one-on-one with every tenant. But once they get an email, once they receive, they submit an application, they receive an email. And then we're communicating through email and task in the Neighborly portal to share what they need to complete the application. And in some cases, our clientele is very high touch. And so sometimes they're not monitoring their email. And so we have to send multiple notices out to them. And then that's when we have some of the staff kind of reach out to them via telephone to say, we've been trying to contact you. But that is usually several weeks into the process because, our staff, as Dr. Brooks said, we have staffed up, but the applications really significantly outweigh the number of staff that we have. And so we are encouraging the tenants through email, through phone calls, through text messages to monitor their emails, their text messages, and the portal so that they can engage with us that way, and then their applications will get processed quicker.
And to add, it's not just the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. Your office is also working with the Water for All, the people that need help with BG&E bills. It's like the go-to all for just about every problem for people in need.
Yes.
And I've just been very impressed because these workers take their job seriously. They are highly, continually trained. Must reveal myself and Councilman Stokes are members of the CAP Center board, so we see firsthand the work that this team continually do. The work that they do on a daily basis is just phenomenal, considering the number of problems that we have and people that need help. Even the Security Deposit Relief Act was put in their hands as well to work. So it's excellent to hear that you have hired more and hoping that more are going to be hired, and hoping that the council is also going to continue to push those needs. Stokes, I see your
I just
hand
have a
is up.
comment. Can you actually, the rest of the colleagues, send them the guidelines in terms of what's required when they apply for different monies?
Can we send that to?
Yes.
Yes.
Can it be a request, Madam Chair?
Okay.
So everybody had it in front of them, because a lot of times,
Please send a request
if we don't
to
know
the-
exactly what's required, and somebody call and ask that they turned in some paperwork, and you can pull and say, well, did you turn? You can kind of question them, and sometimes it do slip through the cracks, but the more you hire, because of the COVID still has impacted people, you're going to probably, stuff going to slip through the crack. But I know for a fact in the last 2 weeks, we avoided at least 2 evictions. One was rent for $12,000. The other one was for $6,000. And a lot of times it required the landlord, and I don't know if y'all didn't explain it, at one time when the COVID was real bad, the tenant would tell the landlord, you can't make me move, you can't evict me. So what they did was they made the paperwork available to the landlord so he can or she can fill out the paperwork, and then whatever portion of it that the tenant fill out, it made it a lot easier. And then our sheriff right here Cogan wouldn't be able to evict people. And I can say one thing, BCAP has stopped a lot of evictions, even when the paperwork wasn't completed. They stopped people from being on the street. So we need to congratulate them for that, because a lot of times they didn't have all the paperwork, but they were able to avoid the eviction. And working with our sheriff here, he's been very supportive of making sure that that doesn't happen. Thank you.
And on that note, Sheriff Cogan, could you just explain the role of your office and how you work with this process, and maybe a few changes that you have made that have been a problem?
Right. So the sheriff's office is charged with enforcing the warrant of restitutions for these failure to pay rent cases. And so, barring the fact that we're notified that the rent has been paid, we have to go out and execute those orders and evict people. We've worked fairly closely with these organizations, and we're in communication with them. And the goal is that we can work cooperatively, and hopefully, in the future, as we implement some technology within the sheriff's office, we can proactively, when people schedule evictions, make them aware of these programs, because believe it or not, some of the landlords are still not aware that they're able to engage in these programs. And some of the tenants that are now able to call our office and ask, when is my eviction scheduled, we can make them aware as well. So, I think the more that we educate both tenants and landlords that these programs exist, just like the councilman said, like what the requirements are, and as a stakeholder, the ones who have to actually go out and do the enforcement, the more we can, as a sheriff's office, try to say this is what you can do to prevent this from happening, especially early on when we're serving the initial notices that are letting people know when these evictions are occurring and that they have a court date for an eviction and the process has begun. The more effective we can be in that, I think the more effective the programs can be in order to try to avoid these when they are avoidable.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your testimony.
Sure.
Did you have a follow-up or any other committee members? And we'll circle back, but we'll circle back to the sponsor.
Okay. So just had a little bit more specifics on, or looking for one question for the sheriff, and then a follow-up on the wait time and processing question. So one of the things actually we worked on before you were the sheriff was trying to get out resource lists during evictions, and I appreciate your help on that. Is that something that we can, I guess, try and come back to, like at the point that there's a posting, if there is an opportunity to provide information on this program? Obviously people are calling, it sounds like you're doing referrals, that's great to hear. Are there other proactive steps that also can be taken when the sheriffs are actually out in the field to promote this and try and pull more people in before it's too late?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We have notification requirements. So like when we mail out the summary ejectment notice, which again is the start, that's what we worked on. Mm-hmm. There's a new notice that's been sort of going through a review process that has current information on it and has information about this on it, both in English and in Spanish, that's going out, which is, I think, is going to be very helpful. My director of communications is here in the audience. We're building out our website. So this is something that would be important to put on the sheriff's website, again, to try to educate the public, tenants and landlords, that these programs exist. And of course, we're open to any suggestions that would be that would work to try to assist people knowing about these programs, filling out the paperwork, and trying to avoid preventable evictions where the tenant is able to pay and the landlord's able to be made whole.
Awesome, thank you.
You're welcome.
So on the processing piece, do we know how many applications are still pending process, how many are payment pending, and the average length of time between processing and the issue of payments?
So currently, we have 16,000 applications that are still under review, and that can be under any
any stage of under review. And so it can be, we're waiting on an applicant information, we're waiting on a landlord to submit information, we're waiting to, because we work closely with DHCD when there's outstanding licensing requirements. So it could be outstanding, like in that, any place of the phase. And so to reiterate with the, and we can follow up with information around the time frame for processing, but it definitely varies based on the prioritization. Neighborly is set up to prioritize applications based on the federal requirements. And so it bumps applicants up based on what those requirements are for prioritization. And so if there is a warrant of restitution attached to the application, then Neighborly assigns it a certain number of points. If they have an application where the tenant has responded that they've been unemployed for 90 days, or if they are below 30% of AMI, then all of those applications are bumped to the top. And so it might be helpful if we kind of break out the categories and then do wait times based on that, because the wait times are always going to vary just because of those prioritization requirements.
Okay. And is there a notification system in place that like maybe alerts you all that, you know, an application has been pending for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, and there hasn't been any movement? Maybe folks need a nudge. Like how does that work with the software and sort of the staff follow-up? How are those two pieces integrated?
So it's not like an alert that happens, but we can go into the system and see how long an application has been in queue. However, it's still, if it doesn't rise to the level of those significant levels of prioritizations, it's not going to bump up. Now, the date of the application, it is one of those priority metrics, right? And so if somebody has been in the queue for 90 days, they'll definitely have more points assigned to their case than somebody who just applied today. But then if I apply today and I meet all of those other requirements, my application will be bumped ahead of that person who's been in the queue for 90 days if they don't meet those other requirements.
Got it. Okay. So it's like some sort of algorithm that helps lift up how you prioritize your follow-up time or staff time. Got it. Okay. I'll wait on the additional data on as a follow-up, Madam Chair, on the average wait time and sort of other barriers that you may think could be helpful to inform the committee better understanding the process.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Chair.
Okay. So, yes, and then we'll move to testimony. Go ahead. Councilwoman Ramos.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Brooks, I see in your report that MOCFS has received $82 million in total local, state, and federal funding. And as of August, we've spent about 73% of it, which is great. So the federal funding is supposed to we're supposed to get another tranche of money. Is that correct?
No.
No. So we're about to end this program, basically.
So the federal funding, we've spent that down. And so what we are actually doing, because we know the need is continuing, that we are looking at ways to continue this program, to be able to continue to provide the supports that are needed for our families in a way, because prior to COVID, we did have eviction prevention. So we were supporting.
We did, yeah, but
we were supporting, and we know that the need has become greater since COVID. And so we are working with our sister agencies. We're also reaching out to the state, as well as been in contact with the federal government to see if they're going to provide additional, because it's not just Baltimore City, but this is across the country.
No, it's a crisis.
So we are
all
reaching
over.
out for additional
So we had to spend the money by the end of 2023, but we're about to finish way before then.
So based upon where we are in our spending, we should be spent by the mid of March.
We're going to run out of money by mid-March.
So we're not going to totally run out of money. However, we will have spent down most of the funds that we have by mid-March, and then look at how we're going to have to reallocate and resupport how we are supporting our families. And so
Because you're
we
going to have to do some triaging, obviously, with those who are facing eviction, and then those who, you know, are your repeaters in terms of how to get them additional support moving forward. But this is bad. Like, this is super bad. I mean, it's not just a little bad. And so the problem is, you know, we don't have anything yet in the state budget allocated. And I'm hoping we've been to our federal partners to say, hey, wait a second, you know, you've got to do this, and that we're working with through MACO and through our other partners to help us with, you know, advocacy, because you've got 16,000 applicants. That money's not going to fund all 16,000 applicants, is what you're saying to me.
Absolutely. So yes, we are working with our federal partners as well as with our state partners. So we have
strategies.
Exactly, yes, to look at those strategies, and again, like along with the other jurisdictions within the state of Maryland, we are not the only district that is facing this, and so we have already partnered and lobbied our state for some additional funds.
Well, I do have a bill that I introduced in August that would lower the threshold for adding the yield tax for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to try to get a little bit more money for the trust fund. It's not going to be a lot. It's not going to fund all of this, but it's a little bit. So I'm hopeful we can move that forward to help out. But I want to offer to use us as partners in advocacy, because we get the complaints from our residents and want to support the efforts in working with our new governor. There isn't an allocation in there yet, but hopefully there will be in a supplemental. Working with our federal partners, like, we want to be your partner in this. I mean, this is drastic. This is bad. And so I'm glad that we were able to schedule this hearing today to be able to sort of sound the alarm, because we're going to see a lot more evictions for people that just can't. I mean, times are tough for everybody right now. I mean, I just paid $7 for a box of Cheerios. Like, that's crazy. So, you know, I think that's, this is really a big deal. So please count on us. You have to include us in these conversations so that we can be advocates for you. So that's my last question. Thanks.
Absolutely.
So
Thank you.
on that note, I think one of the asks is guidelines. Well, we do have public testimony, but one of the asks is for guidelines for of the process, and that you can submit straight to Jennifer, and she'll disperse. And then another ask of the sponsor is, for the committee, we're not going to vote this out. We're going to, because this is definitely a crisis, and we want to have continued dialogue, so we will be recessing. But before we do that, there is public testimony. Councilman Stokes, did you want to say something?
I just had one more request. I know the energy assistance, there's a starting point when applications, persons can apply for applications, and when they can come back and reapply. Can you make sure we get that information also? Because I know there's a gap between 2 years when the programs, let's say the energy assistance started in October. Somebody already qualified. When can they come back again? Within, I guess, a year? Would that sound correct?
Kind of add that in part of your with your guidelines.
But I wanted them to answer.
So it's one grant per fiscal year.
Say it again, I'm sorry.
They can receive one energy assistance grant per fiscal year.
So what would that space?
So the
what would that
fiscal
sound like?
year for the OHAP program runs from July 1 to June 30.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member comments? Let's go on with public testimony, and we'll start with the in-person. Catherine Howard, are you still here? There you are. Thank you so much for your patience today. You've been here since as long as we have.
Well, we enjoy being here, and thank you very much for having us. I'm Kathy Howard. I'm General Counsel for Regional Management, Inc. We are a landlord I think most of you are familiar with. Here in Baltimore City, we've been in the business for 60 years, and I agree with everything that has been said. This has been a very unprecedented time in our renting and managing lives. The one thing that I think that needs to be clear here is, and I have with me our special project manager, who has been really the heavy lifter on putting together tenants and our tenants with BCAP funding. It's really great to see you not in a little teeny weeny screen. And he's going to also be following me. But I think one of the things that I would impress on the council, number one, not all landlords are rejecting this money just because they want to put a tenant out. That's not what we're all about. Most of us are trying to keep these tenants housed. The one thing that I am very concerned about is as I've heard, the prioritizing of the applications of these folks. The courts are open again. The sheriff's office is open again. There are evictions going on. Regional management has been filing on folks who have not made applications or who are in the process of making applications, but they have not been dealt with yet. One of the things that we have been doing is using the court process to get the tenant into court, get them to the BCAP folks who are working at the courthouse, and making sure that we give them the time through a stay of eviction agreement with the court and the sheriff's office in order for them to get through the application process or the reapplication process. What I'm very concerned about when I hear that there's an algorithm making the determination of when there should be a priority for a particular application is that I may be harming my tenants by giving them a stay of eviction versus letting that eviction run its immediate course to where they are on the brink. So I am very concerned about that. I'm sure that you all can give me some insight on that, but it is not the landlord's desire to have these folks evicted. We certainly want to continue to work with the programs. There have been, I'm going to be very honest, there have been some glitches, and Mr. Martin will probably talk about some of those glitches that have happened throughout this process. But we are here. Hey, look, we live in the city too, and we care about the city, and we care about the citizens of the city. So please consider us a partner as opposed to an enemy.
Thank you for your testimony, very important testimony. Thank you. Donald Martin.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I was asked to speak about the reasons why a landlord does not participate in the program. Regional management and myself will do everything we can to get all of our tenants as much money as we can from the rental assistance program. However, there are several reasons why we would not participate in the program. Number one, as you know, each tenant is only allowed 15 months of federal emergency rental assistance money, whether it's from United Way, BCAP, CAN, Catholic Charities. So we get requests from BCAP for tenants who have already received the 15 months from another organization. Therefore, I will email the worker and say, I'm very sorry, but regional management can't participate at this time. They've gotten 15 months. We can't request additional money. So that's one of the reasons I've come across over the last 2 or 3 months. The second reason is there could be a tenant who is in substantial breach of lease that we're not going to keep. they go to Ms. Howard. Ms. Howard reviews every one of them and gives it back to me. No, we're not going to participate in the rental assistance program because we already have a court case filed, and we're going to pursue that. As you know, when we sign for this grant agreement that we get, we have to dissolve all court orders. Everything court order has to be resolved, so we don't participate. The third and last reason is we have a lot of the tenants who are recertifying now. They got to 12 months, and at one point they could only get 12 months. So they raised it last year, middle of the year, they could get 15 months. So we have a lot of tenants who want to recertify and get the additional 3 months. However, regional management already has a judgment for 9 months, and we're getting ready to schedule an eviction. For 9 months, tenant can only get 3 months. So we actually will email the worker and say, sorry, we can't request the funds at this time. They can only get 3 months, the eviction scheduled for 9 months. Unless somebody can raise that to, I don't know if it can ever be raised. I don't know who gets the authority to raise it, but at this point, or at that point, regional would also not participate. So they're the only 3 reasons that I've ever come up with that regional, as a landlord, would not participate in this program. Other than that, I will continue to participate until all the funds are gone. And I will keep doing this and doing this. I know most of the workers through email, through phone calls, and emails. I know all of their staff. So we are constantly working on this program, but there are certain situations where we just cannot participate and will not participate. It has nothing to do with we don't know what we're doing or we don't want the money. We want our tenants to stay. We don't want to evict anybody. But there's always going to be certain circumstances where you can't participate. I don't know where this hearing's going, but if it's going to be like a blanket statement that all landlords have to always participate, well, that, I don't think that can happen, because I've just given you 3 reasons why we won't participate. 2 of which are very clear. They've already gotten enough money. 1, they're in substantial breach of lease, and the third one is because they've gotten almost all the money they can possibly get. That's all I had to say, but I'm glad to finally meet Angela.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
And now we'll move to online testimony. If you are online and would like to testify, please raise your hand. And we don't see any hand raised. No hands raised. We will now unmute you to determine if you would like to testify. These are the telephone callers. Marmeek? Did you want to testify? I apologize.
No, ma'am.
Thank you. Sam? Are you there? Sam, did you want to say something? I see you unmuted yourself.
Just listening, thank you.
Thank you. And I think that covers the testimony. Are there any council members that have any comments or last questions? Any comments from the sponsor? I know we've decided to put this bill in recess And there are some information that's going to be shared with council services to disperse.
Yeah, I think, well, thank you all for coming and sharing this helpful info for all of us. I do feel like it's important to continue this conversation, as clearly the answer to the sustainability of the program still remains unanswered, obviously, by larger forces above us or in the city council. So, I would second Councilmember Ramos, if we can be of assistance in Annapolis or with our federal partners, to the MLGR folks, if we can write letters of support or anything that needs to happen to, show the councils is behind this, keeping this program operational, because the impact of the pandemic hasn't ended, and also, outside of the pandemic, there's still this sort of separate affordability crisis for housing in Baltimore City that is leading a lot of people into eviction. And so I just think it's an important conversation to continue, particularly once the program ceases to have this significant funding source coming from the federal government. I think questions about where we're headed moving forward as a city are ones that we should have answers to, particularly because this crisis isn't going away. So thank you, Madam Chair, and I look forward to additional conversation on this.
Definitely, and again, as everyone mentioned, if you need letters of support and things like that, as we can all work with you, with state, federal, we're willing to do that as well. So I want to thank everyone for attending today's hearing and being patient and respectful, and continue to be safe out there. And this hearing is recessed.